Snow falls the way memory does after trauma. In fragments, out of order. Too much at once and then nothing at all. Ayla Thompson opens her eyes to firelight instead of headlights, to the smell of cedar smoke instead of burning rubber, to a ceiling of rough-hewn beams instead of a windshield spiderwebbed with impact. For 3 full seconds she does not know which version of the world she has woken into. Then the question arrives, low and unhurried, threaded with something that might be humor if it weren't so entirely serious. Was I everything you expected? The voice belongs to the room before it belongs to a face. It moves through the air the way heat moves through a stone hearth, present everywhere at once, impossible to locate until she turns her head and finds him seated in a leather armchair pulled close to the bed, elbows braced on his knees, watching her the way a man watches something he has already decided he cannot afford to lose. White hair falls past his shoulders, loose and unbound, catching the low orange light of the fire until it looks less like hair and more like something spun from frost. His shirt is open at the collar, sleeves pushed to the forearm, and beneath the fabric the shape of him reads less like a man who reads philosophy by firelight and more like a man built for centuries of violence he has learned to keep leashed. His eyes are the wrong color for comfort. Pale, silver gray, the color of a sky before it decides whether to snow or clear. And they do not leave her face. She does not know this man. And yet some traitorous, half-conscious part of her recognizes the weight of his attention, the way skin recognizes the sun before the eyes ever open. The words come out cracked, unused, her throat raw, as though she screamed for a very long time, and no one came. You're safe. The words land the way other men state facts about the weather, without inflection, without the performance of reassurance. You were 3 miles from the nearest plowed road when I found you. The storm had already taken the visibility. It would have taken you within the hour. Fragments return to her out of sequence, the way debris returns to shore after a wreck. She remembers the assignment, remembers the resort's press liaison handing her a lanyard and a smile too bright for the weather warnings scrolling across every phone in the lodge. She remembers the long lens in her camera bag, heavier than it should have been after 12 hours on her feet chasing light across the mountain for a magazine piece on a dying ski season. She remembers the rental car's tires losing their argument with the ice on a switchback with no guardrail, the world tilting sideways in a way that still lives somewhere behind her sternum, cold and immediate. She remembers walking. She does not remember how long. She sits up too fast, and the room tilts obligingly with her, and a hand, not unkind, but not asking permission either, settles against her shoulder and presses her back into a nest of blankets that smell faintly of pine and, beneath that, of something she has no name for yet. Something old. Slowly. You have been unconscious for 6 hours. Your body will forgive the fall eventually. It has not yet. Who are you? Arthur. A single word, offered the way a man offers something he has already decided to give away, without ceremony. This is my home. You are at present my only guest, which I understand is an unusual arrangement to wake into. Something dry and almost rueful colors those last 2 words. A crack of light through a door that is otherwise kept very deliberately shut, that makes her look at him more closely despite the pounding behind her eyes. He is watching her the way she has only ever seen men watch things they are afraid to touch. Careful, restrained. As though restraint itself were a kind of architecture he has spent centuries perfecting. The chalet around her makes itself known in pieces as her vision steadies. A vaulted ceiling of dark timber, windows floor to rafter and entirely black with night and snow, a fire burning in a hearth large enough to stand in, and beyond the immediate ring of firelight, shapes that suggest a room built less for comfort than for solitude. Everything is beautiful. Nothing is soft. It is the home of a man who has stopped expecting company. You carried me. It isn't a question so much as an accusation. The way her mind is already trying to make sense of scale, the distance from the switchback to wherever this house sits, the weight of a full-grown woman, the storm. I did. 3 miles. In that? Less than that, in truth, though it would have felt considerably longer to you had you been conscious for it. A ghost of something crosses his face, there and gone, an almost smile that seems to surprise him as much as it does her. I am aware of how that sounds. I promise you I am not in the habit of collecting strangers from the roadside. Then why? Because I was on the mountain when your car went off the switchback, and because the sound a vehicle makes when it leaves the road is not a sound I am able to hear and then continue with my evening as though I had not. His voice has gone quieter, some careful distance closing without his apparent permission. There are things a man cannot walk away from and remain afterward a man he recognizes. That was one of them. She studies him in the firelight, this stranger with the voice like a held door and the eyes that seem to be doing several kinds of arithmetic behind their calm, and something in her chest, bruised, adrenaline scraped, entirely unreasonable given the last 6 hours of her life, refuses to be afraid of him. She notes this refusal with the same distant clinical interest she notes everything, the photographer's habit of cataloging a scene even while standing inside it. Danger, some instinct insists, quietly, from the back of the room. And beneath that instinct, contradicting it without apology, not from him. I need to call someone. She's already reaching for a phone that isn't there. My friend. She'll be losing her mind by now. I was supposed to check in after the shoot. There is no signal here. The words come plain, an apology folded into the flatness of the delivery. The storm has taken the lines further down the valley as well. I checked before you woke, in case it mattered to you immediately. It will likely be morning before anything is restored. I can take you down to the main road once the weather clears enough to make the drive survivable. But tonight I am afraid the mountain has made its own decisions about where you sleep. The unfairness of it. Stranded, injured, in the home of a man she has known for the length of a single conversation, should frighten her more than it does. Instead, there's an odd, unwelcome ease creeping in beneath the panic, the sense of having been caught by something built specifically to catch her, though that thought arrives and departs too fast to examine. You still haven't answered the actual question. Deflection through interrogation has always been safer than sitting with feeling. The one you opened with. Was I everything you expected? Expected from what, exactly? You'd never met me before tonight. Something shifts behind his eyes, quick and complicated, gone before she can name it. He leans back in the chair, putting an inch of distance between them that feels somehow more deliberate than the leaning in had been. A poor attempt at levity. Something rueful crosses his features. I apologize. It has been a long time since I've had reason to make conversation with anyone new, and evidently I've lost whatever skill I once possessed for it. A pause, waited. You spoke, while you were unconscious, not coherently, but enough that I found myself curious what kind of woman argues with a snowstorm on principle, rather than simply surviving it quietly like everyone else. I don't remember that. I would be concerned if you did. There's a warmth to his voice now that wasn't there in the first exchange, something loosening in the careful architecture of him, and she finds herself smiling despite the ache in her ribs and the strangeness of the entire circumstance. Smiling at a man who found her half dead in a blizzard and carried her 3 miles through it as though the effort cost him nothing at all. Ayla. The name comes out the way his did. A single word, a small unlocking. Ayla. He tests the shape of it in his mouth the way a man tests ice before trusting his full weight to it. It suits you better than the alternatives I was considering. You were naming me? I was passing the time until you woke. My mind does that, left unattended for 6 hours with nothing but the sound of your breathing and a fire that needed no tending. It goes looking for occupations. The admission has the shape of a confession, something he doesn't often let strangers see. the shape of a solitude so total that a single unconscious houseguest has become, apparently, the most interesting event in recent memory. She wants to ask how recent. She wants to ask how long he's lived in this house at the top of a mountain, where the phone lines fail in a storm, and the nearest neighbor is, by the look of the black windows, nowhere at all. She wants to ask what a man like this, clearly wealthy, clearly solitary, built like something out of another century entirely, is doing alone in Aspen in the dead of a Tuesday blizzard, watching a stranger sleep and inventing names for her out of boredom that reads, now that she considers it, considerably less like boredom than he's pretending. Instead, exhaustion reasserts its claim on her all at once, a wave that pulls her under before she can finish the thought, and the last thing she registers before sleep takes her again is the sensation of a blanket being drawn higher over her shoulder, and the fire being fed another log, and a stillness in the room that feels, impossibly, like being watched over rather than watched. She wakes the second time to gray morning light and the smell of coffee, and for one disoriented moment believes the entire night was a fever dream constructed by a concussed brain in a stranger's snowbank. Then she sits up, carefully this time, and the chalet resolves around her in daylight, and every detail she'd catalogued in firelight reasserts itself in unforgiving clarity. The windows, she now sees, look out over nothing but white, mountain and sky indistinguishable, the storm apparently not yet finished making its argument. The room is enormous, wood and stone and glass, furnished with the kind of restraint that suggests either extraordinary taste or extraordinary indifference to comfort, and there is not, anywhere in it, a single photograph. No family on a mantel. No evidence of a life lived alongside other lives. Just books, hundreds of them, shelved floor to ceiling along one entire wall, spines cracked with actual use rather than decoration. Arthur is not in the room. She can hear movement somewhere beyond it, the particular domestic clatter of someone who does not often cook for two, learning in real time how to do it. And she pulls herself upright against a headboard carved from a single slab of dark wood, testing her body's willingness to cooperate. Her ribs protest. Her head offers a dull, distant ache rather than the sharp warning of yesterday. Whatever he did for her overnight, it worked. She catches sight of herself in the dark glass of the window and startles slightly at the woman looking back. Pale, hollow-eyed, blonde hair escaped from its braid into a halo of static and dried snowmelt, wearing a soft gray Henley that is not hers, and is, unmistakably, several sizes too large to belong to anyone but him. She doesn't remember changing. She decides, deliberately, not to think about that too hard yet, and files it instead in the growing folder in her mind labeled Questions for Later, alongside 3 miles through a blizzard and the way levity had sounded, in his mouth, like a foreign word he'd had to relearn. The door opens before she can call out, and he enters carrying 2 mugs, dressed now in a dark sweater that does nothing to disguise the same overbuilt physicality from the night before. Hair pulled back loosely at the base of his neck. In daylight, he looks less like a figure out of firelight mythology and more like an actual person. And somehow that makes him more unsettling, not less. Because actual persons do not usually look like they've been carved rather than born. You're awake earlier than I expected. He sets 1 mug on the nightstand within her reach, close enough that steam curls up toward her face. Black coffee, exactly the way she'd have ordered it if anyone had thought to ask, which no one had. How is the pain? Manageable. She wraps both hands around the mug more for the warmth than the caffeine. How did you know how I take my coffee? I didn't. Something flickers at the corner of his mouth. I made it 4 ways and intended to let you choose. This is simply the one I finished first. It's such a small, ordinary admission, an oddly human uncertainty from a man who carried her 3 miles through a whiteout without, as far as she can tell, breaking a sweat. That she laughs before she can stop herself. and the laugh pulls at something in her ribs that makes her wince immediately after. And he is across the room and beside the bed before she's even finished the wince, one hand hovering near her shoulder as though physically restraining himself from an examination she hasn't invited. I'm fine. It's a bruise, not a bullet wound. She waves off the hand still hovering near her shoulder. You can stop looking at me like I'm about to shatter. Forgive me. It has been some time since I had reason to worry about anyone's structural integrity but my own. He withdraws the hand, visibly recalibrating, and there's something almost boyish in the way he does it. A large, dangerous-looking man folding himself back into politeness like it's a discipline he's had to practice. The roads are still impassable. The storm is expected to continue through tonight, possibly into tomorrow. I've spoken to the county line, what passes for speaking to anyone, given the state of the phones, and there is no realistic prospect of getting you down the mountain before then. So I'm stuck here. You are stuck here. Something underneath the words she can't quite place. Not satisfaction exactly, but adjacent to it. Relief, maybe. From a man who does not often get relief and doesn't entirely know what to do with it when it arrives uninvited. I recognize this is not how you intended to spend your week. I will do what I can to make the accommodation bearable. You already saved my life. I think bearable is a low bar at this point. I would still like to clear it. The words come plain, without flourish. The kind of sentence that would sound like flirtation from anyone else, and instead, from him, sounds like a vow being quietly filed alongside older, heavier ones. She studies him over the rim of the coffee mug. This man who found her in a blizzard and named her in his head while she slept, and made coffee 4 different ways, rather than simply ask, and she is aware, distinctly, uncomfortably aware, of a pull toward him that has no business existing after 12 hours of acquaintance, half of which she spent unconscious. It is not attraction alone, though it is certainly that. It is something closer to recognition, the sense of having found a room in a house she didn't know she owned. Tell me something true. The directness of it surprises even her. Not the coffee and blankets version. Something real. Because a man doesn't build a house this size at the top of an inaccessible mountain, alone, with no photographs anywhere, and a library that looks like it was assembled over multiple lifetimes, unless he's either running from something or waiting for it. The silence that follows is long enough that she thinks she's overstepped, that she's pushed against a door he intends to keep shut regardless of what she offers in exchange. Then he sets his own mug down, and sits, finally, on the very edge of the bed, close enough that she can feel the cold radiating faintly off him despite the roaring fire, and looks at her with an expression that has stopped performing anything at all. Waiting. His eyes hold hers, steady, unguarded in a way that looks costly. Though I confess I had stopped expecting anything to arrive. It isn't an explanation. It's barely even a confession. But it lands in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading out into every corner of the strange, beautiful, windowless-feeling room. And she understands, with the same instinct that told her, hours ago, not from him, that whatever this man is waiting for, whatever brought him to a mountain alone with a library and no mirrors, and a solitude old enough to have its own architecture, some part of him has already, quietly, decided that the waiting is over. Outside, the storm shows no sign of relenting. Inside, something far older than the weather has already begun to shift. The storm breaks just after noon, the way storms sometimes do in the high country, not gradually, but all at once, as though the sky had simply finished saying what it needed to say. Ayla watches it happen from the enormous windows of the great room, the ceiling of gray unraveling into something pale and reluctant, mountains reappearing at the edges of the valley, like a photograph developing in a darkroom tray. 2 days of white has made her forget the shape of the world beyond this house. She stands there longer than she means to, palm pressed flat against cold glass, cataloging the return of color the way she'd catalog any subject worth shooting. The blue-shadowed snow, the black lace of pine against it, the sun doing its slow, indifferent work of making the whole valley look like it had never tried to kill her. It won't hold. Arthur's voice arrives from behind her, low, and when she turns, he's already dressed for the outdoors. Dark coat, boots, hair pulled back and tamed into something almost formal. Another system is expected by evening, worse than the last. If you want a working phone and an actual conversation with your friend before then, this is the window. You'd take me down. I would prefer it to the alternative, which is watching you attempt to hike 3 miles on a still healing rib because you've decided I'm keeping you prisoner. Something dry crosses his features, quick and wry. I am aware of how the last 2 days must read from the outside. A little. The admission comes gentler than the word itself suggests. 2 days in this house have rearranged something in her sense of scale. Danger and safety no longer occupying the position she'd have assigned them a week ago. Though I notice you're not actually denying the prisoner part. I would never dream of denying you your narrative. The words come with the particular warmth he's begun allowing into his voice when he's teasing her, a warmth that still seems to surprise him each time it appears, as though he's rediscovering a language he thought he'd let go extinct. Get dressed. There's a coat by the door that should fit you better than my shirts have been. The drive down the mountain takes 40 careful minutes in a vehicle old enough to have character, but new enough to have chains, switchbacks unwinding beneath fresh snow that hasn't yet been touched by traffic. Ayla watches him drive, economical, unhurried, both hands on the wheel in a way that suggests he learned to drive somewhere formal and has simply never unlearned it. And finds herself doing the thing she does with every subject that interests her, building a mental frame around him and asking what the light reveals. What the light reveals, this far from the firelit dark of the chalet, is a face without a single line that shouldn't belong to a man in his early 30s, and eyes that carry an age no 30-year-old has ever earned. The town announces itself first as smoke from chimneys, then as a scatter of low buildings tucked into a fold of the valley, a general store with a sagging porch, a diner with steamed windows, a church with a steeple leaning very slightly, charmingly, out of true. A hand-painted sign at the town line reads, Larkspur Crossing Pop. 340, and beneath it, added later in different paint, elevation 8,120 FT, as though the town needed both facts to justify its own existence. It's smaller than I expected. They roll past a shuttered ski rental and a bar with Christmas lights still up in February. It has been smaller at various points and larger. Mountain towns have their own arithmetic. He pulls the truck into a space outside the general store, cuts the engine, and sits for a moment with his hands still on the wheel, some private calculation crossing his face before he lets it go. There is a landline in the store. I'd suggest starting there. The cell towers here are unreliable even on a clear day. Inside, the store smells like wood smoke and coffee, and something herbal drying in bunches from the rafters, shelves crowded with the specific overstocked chaos of a place that has to carry everything because nowhere else nearby carries anything. A bell above the door announces them, and the woman behind the counter, 60s, silver hair scraped back, reading glasses pushed up into it, looks up with the automatic, weathered friendliness of someone who has greeted every stranger in this valley for 40 years. The friendliness lasts exactly as long as it takes her eyes to travel from Ayla to the man behind her. Something happens to the woman's face that Ayla has no immediate name for. Not fear, exactly, though it borders fear the way a held breath borders panic. Deference, maybe, if deference could curdle. Her hands still on the counter. Her spine straightens by some fraction of an inch, an old and evidently automatic posture. The way people straighten in the presence of weather they've learned to respect. Mr. McLeod. The name comes out careful, each syllable placed like something breakable. It's been a while. Willa. A simple word, but there's a courtesy in his voice that feels formal in a way his voice hasn't been with Ayla at all. Old-fashioned, deliberate, a register he's clearly reserved for exactly this kind of interaction. The winter has been hard on the road up. I imagine it's been hard on the road down as well. We manage. Willa's gaze flicks to Ayla and back, quick, assessing, and something in it looks almost like worry. You need anything in particular, or is this just passing through? The young woman needs your phone, if you'll permit it. There's been an accident, and the signal at the house has been unreliable since the storm. Whatever Willa makes of an accident in the house, spoken in the same careful sentence, she doesn't say it aloud. She simply reaches under the counter for an old corded phone, sets it on the wood with a gentleness that seems disproportionate to the object, and gestures Ayla toward it without quite meeting her eyes again. Priya picks up on the second ring, and the sound of her voice, familiar, panicked, blessedly ordinary, nearly undoes something in Ayla's chest that she hadn't realized was still braced. Oh my God, Ayla, where the hell have you— I'm okay, I promise. The car went off the road in the storm and I got stranded, but I'm okay. Someone found me. You've been off the grid for 2 days. 2 days. I called the resort. I called the rental company. I was about 4 hours from calling actual search and rescue. I know. I'm sorry. The lines have been down. Ayla glances up, finds Arthur standing a deliberate few feet away, giving her what privacy the small room allows, his attention fixed with careful casualness on a rack of postcards he is very obviously not reading. I'm safe. I'm with someone who's taking good care of me. I'll be back down as soon as the road's clear. There's a pause on the line, the particular pause of a best friend recalibrating from terror to suspicion in under a second. Someone. Ayla. What kind of someone? It's complicated. It's always complicated with you. That's not an answer. A beat. Is he cute? Priya. That's not a no. Despite everything, the cold, the strangeness, the 2 days that shouldn't have happened, Ayla laughs, and it startles her. The sound of her own laughter in this small, overstocked room that smells like drying sage, with a woman named Willa pretending very hard not to listen, and a man named Arthur pretending very hard not to either. I'll explain everything when I'm back. I promise. You'd better. And Ayla? Priya's voice softens, drops the performance. I'm glad you're alive. Genuinely. I was scared. Me too. Her voice has dropped quieter now. I'll call again tomorrow if I can. She hangs up feeling lighter by several pounds she hadn't known she was carrying, and turns to find Willa watching her with an expression that's shifted again. Something almost protective now, almost maternal, entirely at odds with the careful deference she'd shown Arthur moments before. You're staying up at the McLeod place. Not a question. For now. Until the road's clear. Willa's mouth does something complicated. That house has been empty a long time. Longer than most folks around here remember it being anything else. She glances toward the window, where Arthur has stepped outside to speak with a man loading firewood across the street, his posture unreadable at this distance. My grandmother used to say there was a family up on that mountain before any of this was a town at all. Before the road even. Before the road existed at all, if you believe the old stories, which mostly nobody does anymore, except— She stops herself, visibly, the way a person stops when they've caught themselves saying more than they meant to a stranger. Except? The single word hangs there, unwilling to let the sentence drop. Except everyone up here still calls it the McLeod place, even though there's been I don't know how many McLeods, going back I don't know how far, and every single one of them's looked exactly the same in every photograph anybody's ever managed to take. Willa's eyes come back to her, sharp now. Not unkind, but not idle either. You seem like a nice girl. Careful is all I'm saying. That's a family with old roots and older habits. And old roots don't always mean what people think they mean. The bell above the door interrupts whatever else Willa might have continued, and Arthur steps back inside, bringing cold air with him, his gaze finding Ayla immediately, some silent question in it that she doesn't yet have language for. Everything settled? Yes. She holds his eyes a beat longer than strictly necessary. Willa was just telling me about the house. About your family. Something passes behind his eyes. Not alarm exactly, but a recalibration, quick and practiced. The look of a man who has had this particular conversation end badly before and is bracing, out of old habit, for it to end badly again. Willa tells excellent stories, most of them apocryphal. Most. Willa's tone stays mild. Not all. There's something almost fond in the exchange. Two people who've clearly known each other, or known of each other, for longer than either seems inclined to explain in front of a stranger. They stop at the diner before the drive back up, more out of Arthur's evident wish to give her a proper meal than any stated hunger of his own. He orders coffee, black, and nothing else, and when the waitress raises an eyebrow at that, he offers the kind of smile that closes a subject rather than opening one. Ayla eats a plate of eggs and toast that tastes, after 2 days of whatever careful, competent cooking he's managed at the chalet, almost unbearably ordinary, and watches him not eat across the table with the particular fascination of someone assembling a puzzle from the corner pieces first. You don't eat. The observation comes low, meant for only him to hear. Not often. Not in front of others, generally. He turns the coffee cup a quarter turn on its saucer, a small, precise gesture that reads like the release of some larger tension. You're building a case, I think. Willa's stories, the coffee, the fact that I run cold as the weather outside. I'd rather you simply put the question to me, when you're ready, than assembled it piece by piece from a town that likes to talk. Are you going to answer, if I ask? Eventually. His eyes hold hers, steady. Something old and careful behind the pale gray. Not today. Today I would like, selfishly, one more ordinary conversation before you look at me the way people in this valley have learned to look at my family. I've had 280 years of that look. I find I'm not eager to add yours to the collection so soon. 400. The number lands quietly, almost sideways, dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, and she watches him realize what he said half a second after he's said it. Watches the flicker of something that might be alarm cross his face before he masters it back into stillness. You weren't supposed to hear that yet. I did, though. You did. A long breath, the closest thing to nervousness she's seen from him. I would ask you not to run. Not because I could stop you. I wouldn't if that's what you wanted. But because I find, rather inconveniently, that I would like the chance to explain it myself. In my own time. Rather than have you piece it together from a general store and a diner in a town that has been half afraid of my family since before your country had a flag. Outside the window, the brief mercy of the storm's pause is already beginning to fray at its edges. Cloud gathering low and gray over the western ridge, and somewhere across the street, unnoticed by either of them, a dark car has pulled to a stop with its engine idling and no one visibly inside it. The kind of detail Ayla's photographer instincts would flag immediately, on any other day, in any other week of her life. Today it slides past unremarked, because the man across the table has just told her, sideways and half by accident, that he is 280 years old, and she is discovering, with a calm that frightens her more than any panic would, that she believes him completely. 400 years. She turns the number over slowly, like a stone she's checking for sharp edges. Arthur, that's not a metaphor. You mean actual years. I mean actual years. You look 30. I was 30. Once, a very long time ago, in a country that no longer draws its borders where they were, under a name that doesn't quite survive translation into what people call me now. Something in his face has gone very still, very careful. A man deciding in real time how much of a locked room to open. I was going to tell you gradually, give you the chance to leave with your certainties intact if that's what you wanted, before I made that impossible. And now? And now the choice has been taken somewhat out of my hands, thanks to my own carelessness, and I find myself simply hoping you don't run the moment we're back at a house with a working phone. She looks at him, really looks, the way she looks through a viewfinder when she's trying to see past the obvious composition to the true one underneath, and finds, beneath the impossible number he's just handed her, the same man who made coffee 4 ways rather than ask, who apologized for hovering, who called 280 years of a town's fear, a look he wasn't eager to add hers to. The math doesn't resolve. She lets it not resolve, and finds she is choosing to stay anyway. I'm not running. Her voice is steady, more certain than she has any right to be. But you're going to have to actually explain it. All of it. Not sideways. Over coffee you're not drinking. Tonight. Something in his shoulders loosens, relief moving through him like weather clearing. I promise you tonight. Every part of it. The drive back up the mountain begins in the last clean light before the next system arrives, snow already starting fine and dry against the windshield by the time they cross back onto the private road, and behind them, unremarked, the dark car pulls away from its idle outside the diner and turns to follow the same road up into the hills, keeping a careful, patient distance, the way something old and hungry keeps distance from something it has already decided, months ago, that it intends to have. The knock comes at 4:30, 3 sharp raps against a door that has not, as far as Ayla has observed in 3 days, received a single visitor. And Arthur goes still in a way that has nothing to do with surprise. It is the stillness of a man who has heard this particular knock, or one very like it before, and has spent the intervening years hoping never to hear it again. Stay here. The words come quiet, controlled, and beneath the control something coiled and immediate that she has not yet seen in him, not even 3 miles into a blizzard with a stranger's life in his arms. Whatever you hear, whoever it is, stay in this room. Arthur, please. A single word, and it costs him something to say it. She can see that much even now. I am asking you the one thing I have any right to ask a woman I met 3 days ago in a snowbank. Stay here. He is gone before she can answer, moving with a speed that shouldn't be possible for a body that size, silent on floorboards that creaked audibly under her own weight an hour ago, and she is left alone in the great room with the fire and the black windows and every instinct in her body screaming at her to do the exact opposite of what he's asked. She goes to the door anyway, not through it. She isn't reckless, whatever the last 3 days might suggest to the contrary, but to the narrow window beside the frame, angled just enough to give her a slice of the porch beyond. The man standing on it looks, for one disorienting second, almost like Arthur's photographic negative. Where Arthur is white-haired and pale-eyed, this man is dark, black hair combed back with severe precision, a long coat the color of dried blood, and a face handsome in the specific, symmetrical way that makes Ayla's photographer instincts flag it immediately as slightly wrong, too composed, the way a mannequin is composed. He is smiling. The smile does not travel anywhere near his eyes. Arthur. The voice carries through the door with unnatural clarity, cultured, faintly accented in a way she can't place, each word set down like a chess piece. How positively rustic. A chalet. I confess I expected something with rather more history, from a man who has so much of it. Nikolai. Arthur's voice from the porch now carries none of the warmth she's grown used to over 3 days. Flat, careful, a wall built entirely out of civility. You're a long way from home. Home is a rather fluid concept for men like us. Wouldn't you agree? I go where interesting things are happening. A pause, unhurried, deliberate. And something interesting is happening here, Arthur. I could feel it 3 towns down the valley. 140 years of admirable, boring solitude. And now, company. In February, during a storm significant enough that even I had trouble tracking the roads. You're mistaken. I am very rarely mistaken about you. It's something of a specialty." Nikolai's tone shifts, drops something performative, and reveals, briefly, an edge underneath that makes the hair on Ayla's arms rise even through a closed door. "I saw her, Arthur. Larkspur Crossing this afternoon. Blonde, American, entirely unremarkable except for the fact that you were sitting across a diner table from her looking at her the way you haven't looked at anything since— Don't." The single word lands like a door slamming, and even through wood and glass, Ayla feels the temperature of the conversation change. Feels it the way she felt the temperature change in the car on the drive up the mountain 3 nights ago. Some quality of danger becoming suddenly, physically present in the air. "My apologies." Nikolai's voice smooths back over, silk drawn across a blade. "Old wounds. I forget myself. Though I notice you haven't actually denied the substance of my observation, which is historically rather telling, coming from you. What do you want?" Directness. How refreshingly modern of you. A soft, humorless laugh. "I want what I have always wanted, Arthur, which is very little, and which you have, with equally admirable consistency, refused to give me. I want the parcel on the eastern ridge, the one your family has sat on, unused, for the better part of a century, while my holdings choke on their own borders. I want an actual conversation about the boundary dispute your grandfather's grandfather started, and that you have spent 130 years too proud to finish. And now, apparently, I want to know why a mortal woman is standing on the other side of that door listening to us, when you have spent 4 centuries making very certain that no mortal woman ever gets close enough to listen to anything." The accusation lands with the precision of something aimed rather than thrown, and Ayla realizes, with a small cold drop in her stomach, that he knows she's there. Has known, perhaps, since he arrived. "She has nothing to do with the ridge." His voice stays level, deliberate. "Or with you. Doesn't she?" Something almost gentle enters Nikolai's voice now, which is somehow worse than the edge that preceded it. "You know, I remember the last time you let someone close enough to matter, Arthur. I remember precisely how that ended. The pyre was visible from my window for 3 nights. I would hate, genuinely, I want you to believe this, to watch you make that particular mistake twice in one lifetime, however long your lifetime happens to run." Something breaks, audibly, on the porch. Wood or stone, some object giving way under a grip that has stopped being careful. And when Arthur speaks again, his voice has dropped into a register Ayla has not heard from him before, low and old and entirely without the careful courtesy he's extended to everyone else in this story. Willa and diner waitresses, and a stranded, half-frozen photographer alike. "You will discuss the ridge with my attorneys in the spring, as we have discussed it every spring for 11 years running. You will not discuss Seraphine. And you will get off my property before I remember exactly how little patience I have left for you tonight." A long silence follows, taut enough that Ayla holds her own breath without deciding to. When Nikolai speaks again, his voice has regained its polish, but something underneath it has shifted, recalculated, filed away for later use. "As you wish." Footsteps, unhurried, moving off the porch. "Though I'll say this, for whatever it's worth, which I suspect is very little, coming from me. She looks at you the way mortal women look at things they don't yet understand they should be afraid of. I've watched that particular expression curdle before, Arthur. Do think about whether you're prepared to watch it happen again." The car door closes. The engine turns over, headlights sweeping briefly across the black windows as it reverses down the drive. And then there is only the sound of wind returning, the storm making good on its earlier promise. Snow beginning to hiss against the glass in earnest. Arthur doesn't come inside immediately. Ayla watches him stand on the porch for a long moment, spine rigid, one hand braced against the doorframe hard enough that she can see, even through the window, the wood beginning to splinter faintly under his fingers. When he finally turns the handle and steps back into the warmth, his face has arranged itself into something composed, controlled, and entirely unconvincing. You heard all of that. Most of it. She doesn't pretend otherwise. There didn't seem to be much point. Who is he? An old neighbor. An older grievance. Arthur crosses to the fire, adds a log he doesn't need to add, busies his hands with something that requires no attention because his mind is very clearly elsewhere. Nikolai and I have shared this valley, in various configurations, for the better part of a century and a half. We are not friends. We have never been friends. We maintain a kind of detente that occasionally strains, as it has tonight, over property neither of us actually needs, and both of us refuse to relinquish out of what I can only describe, honestly, as spite grown old enough to calcify into principle. That's not all of it. No. He doesn't turn around. It isn't. Who's Seraphine? The name lands in the room and sits there, heavy, and for a long moment nothing follows it at all, his shoulders set against her the way a man braces against weather he knows is coming and cannot outrun. Sit down. The words come finally, and he turns, and there's something in his face now that she hasn't seen before. Not the careful warmth, not the dry humor, but something older and rawer. A door being opened that has clearly stayed shut through decades of careful practice. You asked me, in the diner, to explain everything, all of it, and I promised you tonight. I would have preferred to choose my own moment. I don't seem to have that luxury anymore. She sits. He remains standing, close to the fire, silhouetted against it in a way that makes him look, briefly, like something out of the paintings she half expected to find in this house and didn't. I was born in 1746, in the Western Highlands of Scotland, in a village that no longer exists under any name a map would recognize. I had a family, a trade, an ordinary life, by the ordinary measure of the century I was born into, which was brutal and short and entirely unremarkable in the way that most lives were then. His voice has gone quiet, measured, the voice of a man reciting something he has recited to himself many times in the dark, alone, and never once aloud to another person. I was turned in 1776, not by choice, in circumstances I am not yet prepared to describe to you in detail, though I will, eventually, if you stay long enough to hear it. I have been what I am for 250 years. Nikolai has known me for 150 of them, and Seraphine... He stops, starts again. Seraphine was mine, 110 years ago, in a way I had promised myself, after the manner of my own turning, that I would never again allow anyone to be. I loved her. I was careless with that love, in ways I have spent a century regretting, and there were people, powerful, old, unkind people, of whom Nikolai was, regrettably, one, who did not approve of what I had chosen to make her, and who ensured, in the particular brutal fashion of our kind, that the choice was never allowed to become permanent. He killed her. He was present when she died. I have never been able to prove more than that, in 100 years of trying, which has not stopped me from believing considerably more than I can prove. Something moves behind his eyes, old grief worn smooth by time, but never actually healed. A wound that has simply learned to ache quietly, instead of loudly. I swore, afterward, that I would not do it again, would not let anyone close enough to be used against me, or against them. 100 years is a long time to keep a promise, Ayla. I had gotten rather good at it, until 3 nights ago, when I heard a car leave a road in a storm and discovered that whatever I'd promised myself, it apparently didn't survive contact with you. The fire cracks, sends a small shower of sparks up the flue, and neither of them moves for a long moment. The weight of everything he's just handed her settling into the room like snow settling on a roof. Silent, cumulative, more dangerous than it looks. That thing Nikolai said. Her voice comes out steadier than she expects it to. About watching that expression curdle. He meant fear. He thinks I should be afraid of you. You should be, by any reasonable measure. Arthur's mouth twists, something bitter and self-aware in it. I am considerably older than anything you have context for, considerably stronger, and I have just demonstrated on my own porch that I am entirely capable of violence when provoked. Any sensible woman would have already found the nearest exit. I'm not particularly sensible. Ask my editor. She stands, crosses the space between them, close enough now that she can feel the cold radiating faintly off him the way she'd noticed that first morning, and finds she isn't reaching for the exit at all. You've had 3 days to hurt me, if that's what you wanted. You carried me through a blizzard instead. You made me coffee 4 ways. You just told a 400-year-old rival to get off your property because he brought up a woman you loved a century ago, and your voice cracked doing it. That's not the profile of something I should be running from. Ayla, I'm not finished. She holds his eyes, steady, refusing to let the moment slide sideways into something either of them can retreat from later. I don't fully understand what you are. I don't know what happens next, or what it means for whatever this is turning into. But I watched you almost break a door frame defending a stranger you found 3 days ago. And I heard the way you said her name, and those are not the same reaction, and I think you know that. Something in his face comes undone, slowly. The careful architecture of 250 years of restraint shifting under the weight of being seen, entirely, by someone who has decided not to look away. I am dangerous. The words come low. Not to you. I don't believe I could be, not anymore, not after this. But to be near me is to be near everything Nikolai represents. Old grudges, older enemies, a world that does not forgive mortal women for mattering to men like me. I have already lost 1 woman to that world. I do not know that I survive losing a second. Then don't lose me. The words surprise even her, simple and enormous at once. I'm not asking you to promise me forever. I've known you 3 days, but I'm asking you to stop deciding on my behalf that I'm too fragile to choose this for myself. The distance between them closes by inches, unhurried, both of them moving as though the moment might shatter under any speed greater than absolute care. And when his hand finally rises to her face, cold, careful, trembling very faintly in a way that reads as more human than anything else he's shown her, she leans into it instead of away, and understands, with a clarity that arrives like the mountain air outside, cold and clean and entirely without doubt, that whatever Nikolai Volkov came to this porch to threaten, he has already, without meaning to, made it inevitable. Outside, the storm settles fully back into the valley, burying the tire tracks Nikolai's car left in the drive, burying the porch and the splintered doorframe and every trace of the confrontation that just occurred. But inside, in the firelit dark of a house built for solitude, something has been decided that no amount of snow will be able to undo. The radio crackles awake just after breakfast on the 4th day, a battered emergency unit Arthur keeps mounted beside the kitchen window, and the voice that comes through it, thin, urgent, threaded with static, belongs unmistakably to Priya. Ayla, if you can hear this, please respond. This is not me being dramatic. I need you to actually respond. Ayla is across the room before the sentence finishes, snatching up the handset with a speed that makes Arthur's eyebrows lift, faint amusement flickering under the concern already gathering on his face. I'm here. I hear you. Go ahead. Relief crackles down the line first, audible even through interference, and then, immediately behind it, the particular clipped urgency of a magazine editor who has spent 4 days balancing genuine worry against a genuine deadline. Okay, good. You're alive. We've established that. Now I need to talk business. And I hate that I need to talk business right now, but the Denver desk has been calling me twice a day and I've run out of ways to stall them. The peace. The whole reason you were up on that mountain in the first place, in case the last 4 days made you forget you have a job. Priya's voice softens by a fraction, guilt threading through the professionalism. I know the timing is unbelievably terrible, but the season close issue closes Friday, actual Friday, no more extensions, and they need your images and your copy by Thursday night at the latest, or the whole feature gets bumped to next year. I've been fighting for you. I can't fight the calendar. Ayla closes her eyes, feels the weight of it land somewhere behind her sternum. The job that was supposed to be a week. The mountain that has quietly rearranged the entire shape of her life in 4 days. The version of herself that exists 300 miles away, in an apartment with a lease and an editor and a career she has spent 6 years building. It hasn't disappeared. It has simply been waiting, patiently, on the other side of a storm. There's a flight out of Aspen tomorrow morning, weather permitting, connecting through Denver, Priya continues. I already checked. If you can get to the airport by 9, you'd make your deadline with almost a day to spare. If you miss it, the next window isn't until Sunday, and Sunday doesn't make Thursday work no matter how you do the math. I need to think. Ayla. A pause, and when Priya speaks again, her voice has dropped out of editor mode entirely, into something that sounds suddenly like the friend who has known her since college. Whatever's happening up there, and I don't know what's happening up there, but I can hear it in your voice. Something is happening. I love you, and I want you to be happy. But I also know you. You've spent 6 years building this career one assignment at a time, and I don't want you to torch it for a mountain romance you'll have to explain to yourself in 3 months when the snow melts. Just think clearly. That's all I'm asking. The line crackles once more, breaks apart into static, and then goes quiet. The conversation ended by weather rather than by choice, leaving Ayla standing in the kitchen with the dead handset still in her grip, and Arthur watching her from across the room with an expression he is visibly, deliberately, trying to keep unreadable. You should go. The words come before she can speak at all. I haven't decided anything yet. You don't need to decide. It's your career, Ayla. 6 years, by your friends' count, of exactly the kind of work you clearly love. I have watched you catalog this entire house the way you'd catalog a subject, cataloging the light, cataloging me, and I understand now that it is an idle habit. It's what you are. I would be a particular kind of selfish to ask you to set that down for a man you've known 4 days. You're not asking me anything. I'm the one bringing it up. Only because the radio brought it up first. Something wry and pained moves across his face at once, an expression she's learning to read as his particular flavor of self-deprecation. Humor built entirely out of things that actually hurt. I confess I had rather hoped we'd have longer before the outside world remembered you exist. Don't do that. Do what? That thing where you decide, on my behalf, what's best for me, and then dress it up as generosity. She sets the handset down harder than she means to, the small clatter loud in the quiet kitchen. You did it 3 nights ago on the porch, trying to protect me from Nikolai by keeping me in the dark. You're doing it again right now. I get to weigh my own career against my own, whatever this is. That's not a decision you get to make faster than me just because you're braced for the worst outcome. Something in his shoulders loosens, an old defensive posture recognizing itself and, with visible effort, standing down. You're right. Forgive me. It is an old habit. Deciding things for people before they can be taken from me by someone or something else. I am aware it isn't a flattering one. It's not. It's also very obviously coming from somewhere real, so I'm not going to pretend I don't understand it. She crosses the kitchen, closes the distance between them the way she's learned, over 4 days. That closing distance with this particular man means something. A decision each time, not a drift. Here's what's actually true. I have a deadline. I have a job I love and worked hard for, and I'm not going to pretend that job doesn't matter just because the last 4 days have been the strangest, most extraordinary thing that's ever happened to me. Both of those things are real at the same time. So you're going. I'm going to Denver tomorrow. I'm going to file the piece and see Priya and sleep in my own bed for one night, because I think I actually need that. Need to know I still fit in that life, before I decide anything permanent about a different one. She takes his hand, cold as it always is, and finds she no longer registers the cold as strange so much as simply his. One more true fact about a man made almost entirely of true facts she's still learning. And then I'm coming back, if you'll have me. Not because you need me to, and not because I feel sorry for 280 years of solitude, but because I have spent 4 days in a house with no photographs, and I don't want it to go back to having none. Something breaks open in his face, quiet and total. The particular vulnerability of a man who has spent a century learning not to hope and is discovering, in real time, that the discipline has failed him completely. You would come back here, to this. I would come back here, to you. She holds his eyes, steady, letting him see that she means it in the specific, unglamorous way, rather than the poetic one. I'm not deciding forever, Arthur. I don't think either of us is ready for that conversation, honestly, 4 days in. But I'm deciding this, that whatever's happening between us is worth finding out the shape of, on purpose, with my eyes open, instead of running from it because it's inconvenient, or strange, or older than my entire country. He is quiet for a long moment, and when he finally speaks, his voice carries a roughness that wasn't there a moment ago. I have a great deal of practice losing people to the world beyond this mountain. I find I have considerably less practice trusting that someone might choose, deliberately, to come back to it. Then let me be the practice. That night, her last for now, both of them agreeing without quite saying so that tomorrow's departure means something neither of them wants to name too directly. He takes her to a part of the house she hasn't yet seen, a small workroom off the library lined with tools worn smooth by use rather than decoration, and from a drawer that sticks slightly with age, he produces something small and wrapped in cloth gone soft from handling. My father carved this. He unwraps it with a care that makes the object feel, before she's even seen it, like something significant. In 1760, or thereabouts, I no longer remember the year with any precision, though I remember his hands and the particular sound the knife made against the wood in the evenings, after the day's work was done. The cloth falls away to reveal a small wooden bear, no larger than her palm, carved with the plain, functional beauty of someone who worked with his hands for a living and made art only in the margins of that work. Rough in places, smoothed by 2.5 centuries of handling in others. The grain of the wood gone dark and warm with age. It's the only object I still possess from my mortal life. I have carried it through every century since, through every house I've abandoned and every name I've discarded, because it is the one proof I have that the boy who existed before Arthur MacLeod the vampire also actually existed, once, and was loved by someone, and mattered. He places it in her palm, folds her fingers over it gently, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. I would like you to take it to Denver. Not as a promise. I understand you've asked me not to extract promises from you before either of us is ready to make them. As a anchor, perhaps. Something to hold, if the ordinary world starts to feel more real than the last 4 days, so you remember they happened. So you remember I'm still here. She closes her fingers around the small carved weight of it, feels the 260 years of history compressed into something that fits entirely in her palm, and finds she has to look away from him for a moment before the feeling in her chest becomes visible on her face. I'll take care of it. I know you will. It's rather why I'm giving it to you. A ghost of dry humor returns to his voice, cutting through the weight of the moment with the particular timing she's come to recognize as deliberate, his way of making room for both of them to breathe. Though I will say, for the historical record, that this is the first time in 260 years I have willingly handed my father's carving to someone who owns, by her own admission, a car insurance policy, that currently believes her rental vehicle simply vanished into a snowbank, never to be seen again. That's not... Okay, that's actually a fair point. I do need to deal with that. You have several days of ordinary catastrophes waiting for you at the bottom of this mountain. Insurance claims, missed calls, an editor who sounds, if I'm reading the tone correctly, formidable. Something warmer moves through his voice, affection worn thin over old grief, but entirely genuine. I find myself almost envious of the ordinariness of it. I have not had an insurance claim to file in longer than your country has existed. She laughs despite everything, the sound loosening something tight in her chest, and he watches her laugh with the particular expression of a man cataloging something he intends to remember for a very long time. Which, she understands now, for him, means considerably longer than it would for anyone else she has ever loved. They don't sleep that last night, not in any conventional sense. They lie together in the fire-lit dark of the room where this entire impossible story began, talking in the low, unhurried voices of two people trying to fit several lifetimes of getting to know you into a handful of remaining hours, his hand tracing slow, absent patterns against her shoulder, her head resting against a chest that doesn't rise and fall the way a heartbeat would demand, and somewhere in the deep quiet of the night, without either of them quite marking the moment it happens, the last of the distance between two strangers in a snowstorm dissolves into something that has no accurate name yet, only weight and warmth, and the particular gravity of a decision neither of them has spoken aloud, but both of them have already made. The morning arrives too fast, the way mornings do after nights that matter. The sky outside finally, fully clear after 4 unbroken days of storm. Hard blue, merciless sun on fresh snow, the whole valley glittering with a beauty that feels almost cruel, given what it's making possible. Arthur drives her down the mountain in near silence, the small wooden bear riding in the pocket of her borrowed coat, and at the airport, in the particular chaos of a small regional terminal trying to process 4 days of delayed flights at once. He holds her for a long moment against the noise and the announcements and the general indifference of a world that has no idea what it's about to interrupt. Thursday. The word comes muffled against his chest. I file the piece Thursday. I'll be back by the weekend. I promise. Storm or no storm. I'll be here. He pulls back enough to look at her, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that still, after everything, catches her off guard. I have spent 250 years learning how to wait for things. I find I have gotten considerably better at it, this past week, than in all the centuries before it combined. She kisses him once, quick and fierce, and entirely inadequate to the size of what she's feeling, and then she's through security. And then she's on a plane climbing up out of the valley into a sky so clear it doesn't look real, watching the mountains fall away beneath her. And somewhere down there, invisible now beneath cloud and distance, a house with no photographs is waiting for the first time in longer than anyone in this valley can remember for someone to come back to it. What she doesn't see, from 30,000 feet, is the dark car parked at the edge of the airport lot, engine idling, watching the same plane climb into the same sky, with an interest that has nothing to do with weather and everything to do with patience. The particular, terrible patience of something that has waited 100 years for one mistake, and has just watched Arthur McLeod make it in broad daylight, in public, for anyone paying the right kind of attention to see. Denver arrives around her like a held breath, finally released. Traffic and noise, and the particular gray urban light of a city trying to remember what February looks like without a mountain blocking half its sky. And Ayla spends Thursday morning in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment, laptop open, the small wooden bear sitting on the table beside her cup, like a paperweight holding down something considerably heavier than paper. The piece comes together faster than she expects. 4 days of images and impressions pouring out of her in a single unbroken sitting, the words arriving with an ease she hasn't felt in months, as though the mountain gave her not just a story to write, but the clarity to finally write it well. She files it at 2 in the afternoon, 41 hours ahead of deadline, and sits back in her chair with the particular light-headed satisfaction of work finished, watching the cursor blink at the bottom of a sent email like it might still change its mind. Priya calls within the hour, breathless with relief and questions, and they make plans for dinner. Real plans, ordinary plans, a version of Ayla's life that still exists and still wants her in it. And by 5 o'clock, she is walking the 6 blocks from the office back toward her apartment through the particular blue hour of a winter evening, streetlights flickering on ahead of full dark, the bear a small solid weight in her coat pocket where her hand keeps finding it without her quite deciding to. She doesn't notice the car until it's already too close. It pulls alongside her on a quiet cross street between the office district and her building, a stretch she's walked 100 times without incident. And the back door opens before she's fully processed the vehicle's presence at all. And then a hand, cold and impossibly strong, closes around her arm and pulls her off her feet with a violence that has nothing human in it, and the street simply disappears, replaced by the interior of a car moving fast down streets she doesn't recognize, and the face across from her, calm and composed and smiling that same smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Ayla. Nikolai tastes the name deliberately, testing whether it deserves the weight Arthur has evidently given it. We haven't been properly introduced. I do apologize for the informality of the circumstance. Let me go. In a moment. I promise you. In a moment, this will all make considerably more sense. He studies her with the clinical, unhurried attention of a man examining a specimen, and something in his gaze makes her skin crawl in a way Arthur's never has. Not once. Not even in the first strange hour of waking in his bed. I confess I'm curious what he sees. You're lovely, of course, in the ordinary human way. But Arthur has watched 3 centuries of lovely women pass through this valley without so much as slowing his stride. There's something else here. Something he's not telling either of us. What do you want? I want him to understand, finally, after 130 years of boundary disputes and polite détente, that some things are not actually his to keep simply because he wants them. Nikolai's voice stays perfectly level, perfectly reasonable, which is somehow more frightening than rage would have been. I lost something to him once, a very long time ago, that he has never once acknowledged taking. I find myself this evening in the mood to finally collect on an old and patient debt. The car stops in an alley behind a row of shuttered warehouses on the edge of downtown. Brick and rusted fire escapes, and the particular emptied-out silence of a district that has no reason for anyone to be there after dark. And Nikolai pulls her out onto the pavement, with the same effortless, terrible strength, positioning her against a wall with one hand at her throat. Not tight enough to choke, just tight enough to make the point that he could. Here is what happens now. His voice drops, quiet, almost gentle, the gentleness somehow worse than any threat could have been. I am going to hurt you. Not fatally, not yet. I want Arthur to arrive in time to see it happen, to understand precisely what it costs to love a mortal woman in a world that has never once forgiven him for surviving his own history. And then, once he understands, once he has watched me take from him the way he took Seraphine's future from me a century ago, I will finish what I've started, and he will spend the next several centuries exactly as alone as he was always meant to remain. You blame him for her death. The words come out steadier than she feels, some instinct telling her that fear will only feed whatever hunger is driving this. But he didn't kill her. You did. Or you were there when it happened, which is close enough that it should be your guilt, not his. Something flickers across Nikolai's composed face. Not quite anger, something colder and more precise. Seraphine chose him. Freely, completely, the way you appear to be choosing him now, and I made the mistake, a century ago, of believing that choice was mine to overrule. I have had 100 years to regret the method. I have had considerably less time to regret the outcome, which is that Arthur MacLeod has now spent a century believing himself cursed to be alone, when the truth is considerably simpler. He was never cursed. He was punished, and I have been waiting very patiently for the day he gave me a second opportunity to finish the lesson. The grip at her throat tightens, just slightly, just enough to make the next breath a genuine effort, and somewhere in the deepening dark of the alley, Ayla finds herself thinking, with a clarity that surprises her even now, not of fear, but of the small wooden bear in her pocket. 260 years of a father's hands, and a boy who existed before any of this began, and the promise she made on an airport tarmac 4 days ago that she intended, however this ended, to keep. The sound that interrupts them arrives before Arthur does. A low, building vibration in the air, glass in the nearest windows trembling faintly in its frames, and then he is simply there, appearing at the mouth of the alley with a violence of motion that makes the intervening space between them collapse in something less than a second. His face a mask of controlled fury that Ayla has never once seen on him. Not on the porch, not anywhere. But something is wrong with him. She sees it immediately, even through the fear and the hand still at her throat. His movements carry a fractional hesitation. They didn't have 3 nights ago on the porch. His skin in the dying evening light looks somehow thinner, more fragile. The last direct sun of the day still bleeding gold across the western rooftops and catching him in its edge. He has driven through daylight to reach her. She understands, watching him, exactly what that has cost. Let her go. His voice carries none of its usual measured control, raw, urgent, a fraying rope pulled taut past what it was built to hold. There he is. Nikolai's smile widens, delighted, cruel. I confess I wondered if you'd actually attempt this in daylight. Sentiment does peculiar things to even the oldest of us, it seems. Nikolai, this is between us. Let her walk away, and we finish this the way we should have finished it a century ago. Just the 2 of us, no witnesses, no mortals caught in the middle of a debt that was never theirs to pay. But that's precisely the point, Arthur. She is the debt. Nikolai's grip shifts, not releasing her but repositioning, using her as a shield between himself and the fury advancing toward them both. You took Seraphine's choice from me. I intend to return the favor precisely, symmetrically, watching you lose your choice the exact same way I lost mine. What happens next unfolds too fast for Ayla to properly track. Arthur closing the remaining distance in a blur that the weakened, sun-thinned version of him shouldn't logically possess. Nikolai's hand wrenching hard enough at her throat that pain explodes white behind her eyes. And then she is falling, released. The alley wall rushing up to meet her shoulder as the 2 of them collide somewhere above her in a violence of motion and sound that she can only partially process. Snarled words in a language she doesn't recognize, the sickening crack of impact against brick, a cry that might be Nikolai's and might, terribly, be Arthur's. She scrambles upright in time to see Arthur go down hard, Nikolai's hand closing around something long and silver-edged pulled from inside his coat, and understands, with the particular horror of watching a car crash in slow motion, that whatever weakness the daylight has left in him, Nikolai intends to use every inch of it before the sun finishes setting. No. The word tears out of her before she's decided to speak at all, and she is moving before she's decided to move either, throwing herself between the descending blade and the man on the ground with no plan beyond the simple, overwhelming certainty that she cannot watch this happen and do nothing. The blade doesn't reach her. Arthur's hand closes around Nikolai's wrist with a speed that defies the exhaustion visible in every other line of his body, wrenching the weapon aside with a crack of bone that makes Nikolai scream for the first time all evening. And in the half-second of shocked silence that follows, Arthur drives forward with everything the dying light has left him, burying that same silver-edged blade in the one place old wounds never fully heal. Nikolai doesn't scream again. He simply stops, mid-motion, the cruelty draining out of his composed face along with everything else, and crumples to the alley floor with a stillness that carries its own terrible finality. The debt he spoke of, whatever its original shape, finally and permanently closed. The silence that follows is total, broken only by Ayla's ragged breathing and the last, fading light going gold and then gray, and then gone entirely over the rooftops. And when she turns to Arthur, she understands immediately that the fight has cost him something the daylight alone couldn't explain. He is on his knees, one hand pressed against a wound at his side that shouldn't be bleeding the way it's bleeding. Silver poisoning spreading dark and wrong beneath skin that has gone the color of old paper. And his eyes, when they find hers, carry an exhaustion that looks less like injury and more like an ending. Arthur. She's beside him instantly, hands finding the wound, finding his face, finding every part of him at once as though contact alone could hold him together. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. You can't. The words come thin, stripped of their usual weight, entirely without fear, which frightens her more than fear would have. Silver, this deep, this close to the heart. It isn't a wound that heals, Ayla. Not for what I am. It's the one thing that actually kills us. Then turn me, right now. If dying is the only way through this, then let's not do it alone. No. The word carries more strength than anything else that's come out of him tonight. An old, absolute refusal rising up through the failing edges of him. I will not spend my last hour making you what killed the last woman I loved. I would rather die as I found you, human, whole, entirely yourself, than live another day having taken that from you in a moment of panic. Then I don't accept this. I don't accept losing you 5 days after I found you. Her voice breaks finally, all the careful composure of the last hour giving way at once. There has to be something. 280 years, Arthur. There has to be something. Something shifts in his face. Not hope exactly, but the ghost of an old memory surfacing through the pain. A story he'd clearly hoped never to need. There is a right. Old. Older than my own turning. Spoken of the way people speak of things they've decided are myth, because believing otherwise is too dangerous to survive. A binding reversed. It would not save the vampire. It has never once saved the vampire, in every account I have ever heard of it attempted. But it can, sometimes, save the man underneath, if the one performing it is willing to trade one life for the other completely. No partial measure, no middle ground. Then trade it. Ayla, you don't understand what you're asking. It would take everything I am, the strength, the years, the entire unnatural machinery keeping this body from aging the way it should have aged 250 years ago. I would wake, if I woke at all, as an ordinary mortal man, with an ordinary mortal span left to live it in. Decades, not centuries. I would age, I would gray. I would eventually, inevitably, die a human death, and leave you exactly where you are now, except older, except further down a road you'd have chosen with your eyes open instead of forced upon you in an alley. I don't care. The words come without hesitation, without the smallest fraction of doubt. I didn't fall in love with 250 years, Arthur. I fell in love with a man who made coffee 4 ways rather than ask, who apologized for hovering, who carried me 3 miles through a storm because some things a person cannot walk away from and still recognize themselves afterward. Be that man. For however long you get to be him, I would rather have decades of you, entirely mortal and entirely mine, than centuries of watching you disappear tonight in an alley because you were too proud to trade a curse for a life. He looks at her for a long moment, silver poison and dying light, and 250 years of careful solitude all converging in his pale eyes. And then, slowly, he nods. A small motion, but final, The last decision of a very long life being made with the same deliberate care he's brought to every choice she's watched him make since a snowbank 3 miles from this exact valley. The right, when he speaks it, is old and strange, and half in a language that predates the country either of them was born in, words that seem to cost him more than the wound already has, blood, and something older than blood leaving him in equal measure as the syllables fall, and Ayla holds him through it, both hands pressed to the wound that shouldn't be healing, and somehow, impossibly, is. Watching centuries drain visibly out of his face like tide pulling back from a shore, watching 250 years become 50, become 30, become the simple mortal 30 he was always meant to stay. He goes still, finally, entirely, and for one endless, unbearable second she believes she has lost him after all. And then his chest rises, falls, rises again, the small, ordinary miracle of breath returning to a body that hasn't needed it in 2.5 centuries. And when his eyes open, they are the same pale gray they have always been. But something in them has changed completely. Some ancient weight lifted clean away. Arthur. Her voice breaks on his name, relief and grief and joy arriving all at once, indistinguishable from each other. Are you warm? The word arrives like a discovery, one hand coming up to touch his own chest, feeling for the first time in 250 years the small, insistent drum of a heartbeat under his palm. I am warm, Ayla. I had forgotten what that felt like. I had genuinely, entirely forgotten. She laughs and cries at once, an ugly, overwhelmed sound she doesn't try to hide, and pulls him against her there on the cold pavement of an alley that will never appear on any map either of them cares about, holding a man who has just traded 3 centuries of unnatural power for the simple, mortal privilege of aging beside her, of one day, decades from now, actually dying, the way anyone she has ever loved was always going to die. Except now. Finally, on his own terms, chosen freely, with his eyes open. The sirens arrive eventually, drawn by some passerby's report of a disturbance, and there is a complicated, exhausting hour of explanations that leaves out everything true and improvises everything else. And through all of it, Arthur sits wrapped in a blanket someone presses on him, blinking at the city lights coming on overhead, with the wonder of a man seeing an ordinary evening for the very first time. Later, much later, in an apartment 3 blocks away that has never once held a man in it before, let alone one still marveling at the taste of tap water and the strange, wonderful ache of muscles that have finally, after 250 years, begun to feel tired. Ayla sets the small wooden bear on the windowsill, where morning light will reach it, and turns to find Arthur watching her with an expression she recognizes now as entirely, uncomplicatedly happy. Was I everything you expected? The question echoes the one he'd woken her with 5 days and 1 entire lifetime ago, and this time there's no careful distance in it, no old grief hiding underneath the humor. Just a man, ordinary and mortal and hers, waiting to hear the answer. No. She crosses the small room, takes his face in both hands, feels the warmth of him under her palms like a fact she intends to spend the rest of her life relearning. You were better. Outside, Denver settles into its ordinary Thursday night, indifferent to the impossible thing that has just happened 3 blocks from its oldest warehouses, and somewhere behind them, up a mountain neither of them will ever stop calling home. A house that spent 260 years waiting for someone to fill it finally, quietly, begins to feel like exactly what it always could have been. Not a monument to solitude. A place 2 people are choosing, together, to call morning. Some love stories ask you to imagine forever. This one asks something harder, what you'd be willing to trade for a handful of ordinary decades, freely chosen, over an eternity you never asked for in the first place. Arthur spent 250 years believing solitude was the price of survival. Ayla spent 5 days proving him wrong, one act of stubborn, unglamorous choosing at a time. A phone call answered honestly, a career defended instead of abandoned, a body thrown between a blade and the man behind it without a single second of hesitation. What stays with us isn't the storm, or the reveal, or even the fight in that alley. It's the small wooden bear on a windowsill, catching the first ordinary sunrise. A 250-year-old heart has felt warm beneath it in longer than memory holds. It's proof that the most radical kind of love isn't the one that promises forever. It's the one that chooses you anyway, knowing exactly how much shorter forever just became. If this story found something in you, if you believe love is worth choosing even when it costs you the thing you thought made you safe, tell us in the comments. We read every single one, and we build the next story from what you tell us mattered most in this one. Like this video if Arthur and Ayla earned it. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next impossible winter this channel has waiting for you. And leave a comment. Would you trade forever for a love worth staying mortal for? We'll see you in the next story.